And this, if you watch Carlo and Malik, you'll see many times from the air. It's highly visible. This Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine from right around 300. Can you hear in the microphone?
Yeah.
All right, so this is that Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine, which you'll see many times from drone shots if you watch Carlo and Malik on Amazon Prime. Somehow we're going to get from this, I don't know how, from this at around the year 300 to things in the 17th century in one class. But there's one idea that was expressed in the New York Times and the New Yorker before that I want to repeat because it is so manifest in the things we look at today. That was this: we are a creature of symbols, and our architecture tells us who we are. The nation writes its history in many books, but the book of its buildings is the most enduring. And they're not ideas imposed on buildings, but ideals that the buildings themselves express more lastingly than words can. And that will be especially true when we're looking at churches of the Renaissance and the Baroque age. So from the medieval period, that very desperate, desolating series of centuries when Rome suffered so badly, there were, of course, still churches being made, and they're basilicas. And I just repeat once again to differentiate, there's the Roman Catholic concept of basilica as a designated, especially important Christian church. But we're just in here talking about basilicas as a rectangular building. That's it. And it was used by the Romans, that shape, who doesn't use shapes like that in architecture? They used it for military barracks. They used it for stables. They used it for law courts. They used it anyway. And so the Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine was law and probably other kinds of civic business. And there was that image of the emperor down at the end, the emperor whose head you can still see when you go to the Conservatory Museum. The emperor who, in this looming 40-foot statue, up on a pedestal, is looking upward to the gods, that his connection is to the heavens rather than to his citizens, and encourages, of course, we, the Romans, sense of his being invulnerable. Well, this is following a period when there'd been many assassinations of emperors, so that was extremely valuable to get that idea across. And the legitimacy of his power coming from his connection with the gods. That's the interior, the imagined reconstruction of this, the Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine, which is at the edge of the Roman Forum, closest to the Colosseum. It's right in the heart of things. So then the first Christian churches in Western Europe are basilicas. That's just because that's a simple, used for anything shape, which was then sort of woven into the way the liturgical practices developed. And this is the interior of Santa Maria Maggiore from the beginning of the 5th century, one surviving early Christian interior. It is so arranged that with, it's essentially the ceremony of the Mass is now the center rather than the image of the emperor. And all attention, it's just like looking down a railroad line, isn't it? It's just like a diagram of receding lines. Everything leads your eye down there to the focal point. And in most churches, the semicircle that extends from there, which is called the apse, the holiest part of the church, circular, often associated with the heavens, that faces the east. And the priest also faced the east. So we were behind the priest, and all of us were looking down there to the end. Got that right? That's. I wanted, before saying goodbye to medieval churches, to show you one other that you actually have seen already. It's this little church called San Giorgio in Velabro, Velabro. And where you've seen it is the background of this painting that had the Cloaca Maxima, the great early Russian drain, early Roman drain. So you see the church tower and this. Well, this is a close-up from the side of it. This is the story of Rome writ in small, condensed form, because the north side of that church is built attached to a Roman monument, an arch that was built by money changers and traders in an area of Rome in the beginning of the 3rd century, and dedicated it to the Emperor Septimius Severus. And they just attached their church to it. That little Roman monument still has some quite well-preserved sculptural decoration. And what I am assuming, no one in the 7th century were they at all interested in what this represented, other than a convenient something to use as a building. I have no idea. We have no way of knowing. But this is a scene of a Roman sacrifice. So there you have cheek by jowl, something Christian and something ancient Roman. And this is the interior as it survives. So there are a number of modest, interesting medieval churches in Rome. Beyond which we leapfrog to this. And now you may need to pull me out of this, because I love this building. I mean, sculpture is my first love. And this is something that to me is like almost you can just pick it up. It's small, rounded, you could fit it into your hand. It has such a tactile quality. This is known as the Tempietto, the little temple. Well, you can guess from the name, we've now passed the Middle Ages and we are back to the world of antiquity, now antiquity revived. And what is particularly important, has anybody in here seen this little Tempietto? It's very close to St. Peter's. This little jewel of a building is considered the first, well, really the announcement of the High Renaissance in Italy. So you'll see more images of it now. So the concept is right away leapfrogging over the Middle Ages back to the ancient form of a temple. Not a standard temple, but temples you've seen. And I guess before we go on, better see why it's here. It's over the spot that's reputed to be the spot where St. Peter was crucified. And according to the belief, St. Peter, when he was crucified, insisted on the cross being upside down so as not to, he couldn't do something that had happened to Christ. he was not, he was too ordinary a person to have something like that. And this is Caravaggio's painting of it from a century after the Tempietto, which you can also see in Rome when you go in another Roman church. So this little structure there's nothing in it. There's an altar and a little more because it's over a spot and there's a hole in the floor that supposedly that's where the cross turned upside down was put in. So it's a memorial to something that happened there. It's a memorial to an absence. Now, the architect is a man named Bramante, Bramante. Michelangelo, and Raphael are the great triumvirate of artists of the beginning of the 16th century associated with the creation of the High Renaissance style. Bramante came from northern Italy and then came down to Rome. Do you notice something that's, I just slid into this without, I'm talking about an architect? Have I talked about any architects before? No. I checked my sources. There are 3 names known from Roman architects. The man who designed the Forum of Trajan, we have his name, Apollodorus of Damascus. So maybe he was a slave, freed slave, not sure. Then there's someone who's just mentioned in an epigram, a man named Rabirius. And then another one named Vitruvius, who is a more familiar name if anyone has any kind of background in classics, because he wrote a book about architecture and principles of architecture. And that text survives, and it became sort of like the source book for Renaissance architects about how you make something right and make it Roman and what things should look like. But those are the only 3 names that survive. Yes.
Vitruvius, is that like the Vitruvian Man?
Absolutely. That's the guy. So Bramante, I'll get this out of the way too. Bramante, Bernini, who we'll look at, Michelangelo, none of them are trained as architects. There was no such thing as a profession of architect. The same people might do paintings and buildings, or sculpture and buildings, or painting and sculpture and buildings and jewelry. It's just something visual. So they generally provided the designs and then left it to skilled craftsmen, tradesmen, families who through generations had built to actually execute the structures. So now back to Bramante. That's a lot of groundwork covered there. Bramante, when he came to Rome, of course, he's looking with great interest at what was left of the Roman past. Now that too is different, because St. Giorgio and Velabro, oh, there's a building we can use and we can build against it. It wasn't like, oh, this is an interesting monument of the past. What can we learn from it and what can we do here? The new attitude is partly sponsored by the man who was Pope at the time, Pope Julius II, whose agenda, a very explicit agenda, was to make Rome as great as had been under the emperors, and actually to outdo them. So Bramante has extra reason in this environment to be looking at what there was of Roman ruins. Remember seeing this late 2nd century BCE little temple to Heracles Victor that's down in the Forum Boarium, which you can go see. So actually the Greeks had made little round temples too. No, not a lot of them. Or Santa Costanza, now because it has a front porch that called it Narthex porch, at the ground level, you can't see what you could tell from when you look up the second level, that it's a centralized circular building that had been built for the tomb of Constantine's, one of his daughters, but then it was later was as a church. It's called the Church of Santa Costanza. So of course, Bramante will have looked at that as well. And there's another source that he could be looking around, not at this. This is in Berlin. I'm sure he never saw it, but at reliquaries, because a reliquary is what? To preserve something from the past. There are many of them. You go to the cloisters, you go to the Met, you see the reliquaries. Some of them have various kinds of shapes. Some of them are what are called speaking reliquaries, where the shape of the reliquary tells you what's inside. There are some with, I had to take one out. There was a handsome man's portrait by Donatello, but it had a piece of the skull in there from a saint. Or there's one in the, I don't know if it's in the cloisters or the Met, where there's part of an arm, and the reliquary is the shape of an arm. Or there are other reliquaries that have a see-through piece, so you can see the stone or the bone or the thorn from the Christ crown in them. So essentially, this building is like a reliquary. It's what it has is a space, because there was nothing there to have, but this little shape goes with that. And how little it is, you see, it says it's in the courtyard of a church, San Pietro in Montorio. This is what the plan he had in mind was originally. It wouldn't have looked so uncomfortably hidden away like something in your pocket there. Because the courtyard also would have been circular and surrounded with columns. So you go in there, you're in a circular space, there are large columns, you go through the space, you come to smaller columns, you go inside, it gets darker, and it's smaller yet. So it sets up hushed awe, sort of as you walk in toward it. Three steps, three there for a reason. And then these columns are very, very plain. You know, just as the whole structure is in a way. But here again, well, look at the Capitol. Oh, I just like this. I do like it. It's the order that's called Tuscan. It's the simplest kind of column there is, sort of fatter than the others, and the very plainest capital at the top. Where did he see this? He obviously wasn't looking at a book like this. It's what's at the bottom level of the Colosseum. So he's very inventively combining forms he sees in ancient architecture to create something that has no ancient precedent. Is there anybody else in here that just swoons over shapes and spaces like I do? I just think that's lovely. But I also want to tell you about the coat of arms there. That's for Ferdinand and Isabella. They're the ones who paid for this. So you might say they helped not only supporting Columbus, but Bramante in the founding of a new world in a completely different realm in creating this structure. See, and it's small enough that you can't, it's not made for a camera to capture it. But there it is, and you see where the hole is in the floor. And as you look up, and into the dome. There's domes. Well, you think of architecture in Florence in the 15th century. The domes, you think of the Pantheon. The dome represents the heavens. And that is also considered the perfect shape. And very simply presented. The ribs divided into threes. Again, that divine number. You have it in the stairs outside. You have it in the culmination of the building. This is so carefully thought out. Well, Pope Julius II, highly pleased with that, then immediately gave Bramante a commission to rebuild St. Peter's, which was quite a wreck by then, but also is out of his ambitions to have something that, as I say, surpassed what the Roman emperors had done. And Bramante provided the plan, and some work got started before Bramante died, but it has a long history. It took up a whole class in another series just on that history. But this was a medallion that was struck that shows Pope Julius II and then Bramante's design for what St. Peter's would have looked like. You see how closely he's associating himself with architecture? That I am having this built. Now it's going to be dome on a very grand scale. Now the plan, we still know, there's that huge central dome, and then it's at the center of a cross, the Greek cross where all the arms are equal, in a square. 3 perfect shapes. God's universe. See why in the beginning, I'm reading how the architecture tells you the thought of the time. And the dome as it survives in St. Peter's follows his plan on the interior, not the exterior. And a visitor from Holland in the beginning of the 16th century, did some drawings of a little sketchbook of what he saw there. And this is the mess of dirt and construction of that building underway. So they built those huge arches for the dome. Once they're up, whoever's going to follow has to do something with them. You cannot destroy something that expensive, that difficult to create. All that's going to generate the rest of the design. There has to be that dome that's there. Several architects got involved. Over 40 years, they're putzing around, and Rome was sacked one time for that understandably delayed work. And they were just, I'm going to make an opening through here. I'm going to combine this space. There are various adjustments. And it didn't get finished till long after Michelangelo got involved, and he started working on it in 1546 when he was 71 as his offering to God. He worked on it for the rest of his life. And then this is what ultimately it looked like. That nice compact square is gone because there was a change in the temper of Roman Catholicism. This is the time of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Now, you might say in some ways the building of St. Peter's is implicated in the Reformation, because to raise money for building that expensive structure, the popes began to offer indulgences. The people who offered money for the rebuilding of the church were freed of their sins and wouldn't spend time in purgatory. And of course, that's one thing that Martin Luther rebelled against. So you have that schism between then the Protestants develop off that. So St. Peter is right at the center of this. You could say Ferdinand and Isabella, Bramante, St. Peter's, the Reformation. You can make a false little diagram of the way things go.
Hey, why were the Spanish monarchs building a temple in the church in Rome? The Spanish
yeah.
weren't controlling Rome then.
No, they were controlling southern Italy. Pope Julius was a fierce fighter. I mean, he led his troops in front. But you had people from the Holy Roman Emperor coming down. The French were occupying Milan. The Spanish owned Naples. There was no country of Italy until the 19th century. So they're all struggling for this territory. I guess I hope that it answers it as well as I can. So anyway, with that change, so that's the Reformation. The Counter-Reformation is the church's answer, which is for those people who are falling away, was this is an extremely trivializing way to put it. Everything is possible to draw people back into the church with the understanding that you draw them partly through feelings, not through sentiment, which are not through argument, which is what the Protestants were essentially advocating. Think about this for yourself. No, believe in the authority, the truth, the heritage. Take it. And increasingly, churches needed more spaces for dynamic speakers, preachers. And so they had to stretch the church out so you could accommodate larger congregations. Never the size that they needed this church, though. It's only on great events you need something of that size. But that's a combination of Michelangelo, Bramante, and 3 or 4 other architects. And the exterior of the dome doesn't have that nice Bramante shape. This is Michelangelo's. It's more dynamic. So there you have, of course, I'm sure everybody knows, the front of St. Peter's. Bad design. Felt to be a bad design. Because if you just, it's not good proportions. It's kind of like too broad for the height. Now, originally there were intended to be 2 towers at the end, which, think how many churches, that's a very traditional pattern. And they were designed by Bernini, who's a 17th century architect. But the facade was just being finished, so he got that job. And it was a faulty design, and one of the towers had to be taken down, and they didn't do the other. So it's just left this way. But so faulty design, not faulty design, you also do see how much that is a reverence for antiquity, because it looks like a temple front applied to the church. This is Bernini, his self-portrait he did when he was just a chalk drawing he tossed off in his early 20s. It's a painter, dramatist, architect, sculptor, diplomat, amazing man. And he designed the square, the piazza in front of St. Peter's, which was, of course, very conventional to have that square in front, a colonnaded square. We'll look at how, in front of the Roman Fora, in front of Old St. Peter's. But how different the shape. It's an ellipse and a trapezoid. It's not a circle and a rectangle or a square. It's not that perfect geometry. This is motion and emotion. And you look here and you swing around and you look there. It's a very different concept of the way you perceive the world and the way you move around in the world. And it was meant explicitly, those are the arms of the Mother Church reaching out to you. For the very few people who don't know who Bernini is, I thought you might see one of his sculptures. You can also go see in Rome his Apollo and Daphne, how movement is very important to him. Fantastic artist. And there you see the shape. It's not only like that's the arms of the church reaching out to you, but he's correcting for optically, because by having the arms narrow, when you go there, it looks as if they are parallel to one another. So essentially, visually, it narrows the facade. For any of you who are going to go see this, I encourage you not to stay with the bus tour, not to do this on your own and come up from the front with the grand road that's there, especially since Mussolini's time, but to do it more the way Bramante intended. Come at it from the side. The streets on either side are jammed with buildings. The streets are very narrow. And you see in front of you, your view blocked by colossal columns. And it's not till you go through the columns, all of a sudden you have open space. And originally he intended that for as you come at the front too, because you see he had that colonnaded screen there, and then the road bifurcated and you had to come around. So it would be like a dramatic exposure all of a sudden, like the curtain has just gone up. And of course, no, you have to have a video camera to see this. But it's drama made out of the simplest means. He uses those same Tuscan columns that Bramante used and that are at the base of the Colosseum, just columns. This painting of it by Panini, you see how in his painting it almost looks like the rows are parallel to one another rather than, of course, he can fudge it in a painting, but you don't have the sense that they're narrowing toward you. And that central obelisk, that was the obelisk from the Circus of Nero, which is thought to be where, of course, there are different beliefs about when things are where. This is where Peter was martyred. And that came, so that's an early Roman emperor's work. And it was just, in the 16th century, moved to be at the center of the space. So that's, again, the centuries coalescing in a single work. And there are two fountains. Maybe I should go back. So they make a cross axis, the kind of stretch where the colonnade curves. So you come through those columns, you don't know. I mean, if you rely on your eyes, you cannot see anything beyond. The curve, the row of those columns are so arranged that you can't find a free view. You have to get under the colonnade, that then you can begin to see through it. Then you go into that space, that wide open space after all the congestion around here. And you have the sound of water. So it's multi-sensual appeal. one of the Roman aqueducts had been restored. And so that was water from one of the ancient Roman aqueducts came in here. And when you look at the ends, it's this marvel of something that is so simple, so plain. That just looks like a little temple front. It's as simple as Bramante. And then you have gesticulating saints, of course, all up above each column. So you're surrounded by the whole Catholic Church. And that's just a nice reminder of the scale. Oh, I haven't been there since it became a tourist site like this. I can't imagine that. But look how that swings around. So very different from the movement in a circle. See, you tell me, where's St. Peter's? I wish we had someone here in this one sitting on the base, because you can quite comfortably sit down on this base. You're not just down on your haunches. So you get an idea of the size of this. Well, it would be nice to spend a day moving around in there, but now we move on to subsequent church buildings that manifest this new sense of the faith or the intentions of the Catholic Church. This is one called Il Gesù, G-E-S-U. This is the mother house of the Jesuit order. It looks from the exterior fairly elaborate, but not too different from what churches were before. People who've been to Florence, you go to other Italian Renaissance cities, their structure is quite a lot like this. And it's a basilica again. But look at the interior. This is the wealth of the church, the space for great gatherings of people to hear the word, and ceiling paintings. I'll show you everywhere you look, there's a ceiling painting. This one, the triumph of the name of Jesus. The heavens are just breaking down into the building, or we can move right up to the heavens. You see angels tumbling out of that painting into the frames, over the side, coming down into our space. And we're supposed to imagine ourselves being able to move upward as well. You notice how the paintings don't even stay in the frame. Those are clouds coming in. That's not a painting. But let's see how we're doing here. Well, I'm doing this far faster than I need to. So we're going to look at this being done by, so Roman ceiling paintings take off the 17th century. There are many ceiling paintings that have the same way of just moving out of any standard categories of life and ascending. But look how it's done in architecture. And coming back to a little church by Bernini. It's called San Andrea al Quirinale, and it's within a half a mile's walk of the Trajan Forum. He did this while he was working on the piazza in front of St. Peter's, at the very big middle of the 17th century. These are very difficult, these small churches, to represent in images because they are too small for you. You really have to exercise your imagination to get a sense of what the space would be like inside. But here, you see how this projects, this little porch with this great projecting coat of arms? There's a coat of arms of the cardinal who paid for this. So just as the emperors were associated with buildings, I mean, the value of declaring your piety, declaring your wealth, declaring your power. The Roman prelates were doing that too when they're encouraging the architecture. And this is an old, early engraving of it. The street had just been put in by the previous Pope, and there are a whole lot of religious buildings along this street. But the reason I show this is it's not a good quality engraving, is that you can have some sense of the design, because the church is set back a little bit from the street, so they can have those steps that spill out. It doesn't interfere with the street. So that comes out to greet you. And then the walls on either side curve back. So sort of playing with space again. Now I can't do a great big piazza, but you have the idea, a little bit of the arms of the church coming for you. It's a very intimate scale. I mean, even if it's a little scooter, it's still, you can see, it's small. It was for young Jesuit priests, not really for a local congregation. And this is the plan. No more the harmony of the circle. Now you have the vigorous move of the oval. And you cannot photograph this. So I just brought in a couple of views and trust you get some sense of what it's like. It's richly colored. Some is marble, some is painted marble, a lot of gilding, a lot of gesticulating statues, a lot of paintings. And there are those chapels that are quite deep. So you have that central space and then you have to go in. It gets a little dark, and then you move into those chapels. So we're going to look over the high altar where there's a person who's broken through the pediment, moving up. And behind there, do you see how there's a hidden window and light is coming down onto the altar from the back? Unexplained source. And all that does resolve in a simple circle at the top. Bernini's son said that when his dad was elderly, he would come in here and just sit for hours. that this was his favorite of all the things he constructed. Now, not too far down the street from there, same street, there's another church by his chief rival, a man named Borromini. It's San Carlo alla Quattro Fontana. It's because at this intersection, there are 4 fountains. There's one on each corner. I'll just give you a while to look at that. I say something about who Borromini was. Now, Bernini not only worked across Europe, his influence was so powerful. Not with this man, because what he does is so idiosyncratic. It's almost impossible to do a variation or derive something from what he did. But he grew up in the northernmost parts of Italy, and he went to Milan for a while. Learned about, his father was a stonemason, came from a pretty modest background. But he had just a relative who was one of the later architects on St. Peter. And he came down to work with his relatives. That's the way these builders and architects started generally, was just coming up somehow through personal or some sort of individualized connection rather than through criteria determined objectively. So he came down to Rome, and that's when he took the name Borromini. He got recommendations for some work from Bernini, but they were also Borromini, who was evidently a very difficult person, and ultimately committed suicide by literally falling on his sword. Borromini did this. He was just irascible. He was a crank. And he criticized, here, Bernini recommends him for commissions, and Bernini's saying, he's pretty good, and Borromini's saying, yeah, but Bernini's not very good, and Bernini's bad at doing this and doing this. And he was just a difficult man. But his vision, unique vision, is just, this is an amazing structure. It's a church dedicated to St. Charles Borromeo, a recently sainted figure. And this is Borromini's first independent commission. This is so different from what anyone else was doing. And the street is narrow enough that you can't get away to take it in. You have to stand close to it, and then, I mean, you have to buy into it. But this is as close as you can get at the bottom. Still uses classical elements. Corinthian columns, cornice, but what a very unclassical way to use it. Where's the flat wall? Look at that wall just swinging around. And it looks like a stage prop, doesn't it? It doesn't look like a tack to any building beyond. It's just like, I'm here, not come in. This just dramatic. So over the door, there's a statue of St. Charles Borromeo. And, well, let's look at the lowest level, the oval oval, not circular, not rectangular, windows at the base, lowest level. What are their frames? Nothing architectural. Those are spiraling leaves. So that stone is making an organic form where ordinarily it should be something stone and look structural. And so there's ovals again. Then you move up. There are gesturing saints on either side, and then St. Charles Borromeo in the center. There, the frame is angel's wings. So wall has become sculpture, become immaterial creatures as sculpture. And does Sir Charles Borromeo look out or toward us? No. Already from the exterior, we're being encouraged to look up. And when we do, I don't remember what was supposed to be in the painting, but there was a painting on the exterior in an oval frame being hoisted toward heaven by angels. This is the ceiling from that church, the Jesu, has now come into concrete form and externalized itself. And that's like a little sentry box down below. Curves out, hollow window inside, curving back on either side.
You mean there was an oil painting or a sculpture of a thing?
No, a painting.
How did they expect it to survive? Obviously it didn't.
I don't know.
They haven't taken it so close.
Did they cover it with glass at least?
No. I mean, this man had no more constraints on him than his architecture has on it. I mean, that's just such astonishing architecture where it's like the building is not standing still. Isn't it? Just everything is moving, curving, twisting, going up, coming back, going forward. That's the corner tower. Well, that's a plan. Actually, he was a great geometrician. And, oh, he had a great library too. I mean, he's a real scholarly guy. But this is as they try to figure from his original drawings what he's planning. You can find a hexagon in there, and you can find triangles in there, and you can fit perfect circles in there. It's all based on geometry. It's not caprice, but it's very complicated. And in that little, here's a little factoid for you. This whole church could fit inside one of the piers holding up the dome in St. Peter's. So no camera lens is going to be able to show you the ceiling and the level, but you have an idea from how few pews there are, what an intimate little building this is. And there's essentially no wall. It's just niche, half column, hollow, something moving all the time. And the austerity of the white, I think, to me, makes it more obvious than the color in San Andrea al Quirinale. But then, where you just tip your head back, this is when you look up at what you see. And in that dome, that honeycomb pattern has all the shapes of the geometry that play out in the ground plan. Ultimately ending in the Holy Spirit and the Trinity. Now, there's one other church by him that is not accessible now because it's hidden behind this building, which is Rome State Archives. But in a courtyard behind here, there's another church by him called Sant Ivo, IVO. A little tiny space available. This is the relative that gave him the job at St. Peter's, who did the courtyard. And then he did the church at the end. Here's the plan. And for this one, just forget it. There's no way you can get except a little glimpse, and a little glimpse in a photograph. It's a very tall space. And very narrow, so you know how affecting that is. You don't even have to think, look up. You just know everything is up above you. The plan. Isn't that just awesome? Now, it's possibly Nero and his palace had some structures that were similarly complicated, because at least there they had rotating ceilings from which perfume could sprinkle down. But in all the centuries in between, I don't think there was anything at all. And we have just, oh yeah, well, enough time. This is just a farewell, because this is now I'm going to be the travel agent saying you've just got to go to Rome. This is the Piazza Navona. Now, how many people have been to the Piazza Navona? Right. In the old days, this was really good ice cream shops in this area. And has a church that's partly by Borromini, and Bernini worked on it too. There, it's called San Agnese Agone, but it's not a very good church. But the shape of the Piazza Navona is based on what underlies it, which was a stadium built for the Emperor Domitian. So that had always been maintained as an open space. So that's another contact from the beginning of the class to the end. Oh, Rome is the best. And into this century, it was still flooded in the summers, in terrible hot summer weather. In Rome, which is so low-lying anyway, they could just flood it, and people would go there. They showed carriages going through the water and people swimming and enjoying it. And what you see in the foreground here, I don't have a good image, but that's Bernini's Four Rivers Fountain, which was there actually before the church was. Only one more image. Well, oh, I did show you that. Now you don't really want to see it. Well, there's a better one of the Four Rivers Fountain. He has several fountain sculptures in Rome. So the play of the sound of water, of course, in the hot climate is very refreshing. There's a significant part of the amenities provided in the city. And see, I'll put my coins in the air to get me to go back to, so that's the Fountain of Trevi. But why, this is the 18th century, well, the class doesn't go to the 18th century, but this is the one fountain still being fed by an aqueduct from the 1st century BC. So on that, reluctantly, I say this series is over. Do you have any questions?
Next.
What?
What's next?
The next one is going to be book and manuscript illustrations, starting from the earliest books to at least to Maurice Sendak, and that starts in late February. But so people who came in probably after I was already talking, I made this sheet up that had the list of the monuments that still survive in Rome, if you want to go visit. And if you didn't get that, I need on a piece of paper your email address, and then I'll send you a copy. Okay? Oh, yeah, you're welcome. No questions? These things that just blow you away, right? There's like, what are you going to say? They're just like, oh. I think that must be someone who's listening. She's listening to it.
You used to live here, you moved to Virginia or something there.
Right, with somebody who's listening. Joe, don't leave it out. It's on, back to the